Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I am an ordained minister, kirtan artist, musician, amongst other things. And today I wanted to speak a little bit about how blame makes you powerless. Before I get into the talk, however, I would like to thank the community that makes these talks possible without a paywall, allows me to present them without a paywall, and that is my Patreon community. If you'd like to join that community, please check out the links below. Other ways you can help out is by buying merch, again, links below. And on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, share, and comment, and those things all help as well. All right, so how blame makes us powerless. I know that from a normal, everyday, egoic perspective, it really does seem like there's self and others, and it seems like what those others do really impact us, impact our well-being, our happiness. It really feels like others have things that we need to get from them. And you could say this is one way of playing the game, or one way of seeing things. And so it's a strategy game of you trying to keep what you want and yet get what you want from others. And that's fine, and that can be a lot of fun, and that's sort of the realm of the ego, what the ego likes to play around with. And in that game, there are winners and losers. There are victims and perpetrators. And the name of the game is basically to try and be a winner, not a victim, right? Maybe you're not a predator or a perpetrator. Maybe you don't see yourself that way, but you're winning, right? Well, what's interesting is that game can get old. It can just get tiring for certain people. These are people that I would call old souls. It doesn't really mean anything because technically I think a soul doesn't age. It doesn't really have an age, but it just feels that way, that when someone gets to a certain point, whatever the reason, again, whether that is past lives or it's this life or it's just they're sort of built that way, certain people get tired of that game. You can see there are others who aren't tired of it. They're very much enjoying it. Very often, these are people who are winning, or if they're not winning, they want to figure out how to win in this way, within this framework that I'm talking about, so the egoic framework of self, other, winners, losers, that kind of thing. And again, it's perfectly fine from my perspective. I know many spiritual teachers might say that you need to give that up, you need to let that go, that's not the truth, whatnot. I don't really see it that way. I think perspective, depending on the perspective, and the ego is a perspective, certain truths come from that and certain experiences come from that. And as far as I can tell, maybe certain souls or certain spirits, however you want to call them, they need to have that experience, or they want to have that experience. Maybe they don't even need it. Maybe they just want to play that game. And so my thing always comes back to suffering. Are we suffering or not? What are we doing with that? So if you're enjoying the game, whether you're winning or losing, more power to you. That's what I say. However, certain people, like myself, like many of the people that I work with, either one-on-one or in a group, people that I guide as a teacher, these people are people who have gotten tired of this game. And again, sometimes it's because they're losing at it. I can explain that from a spiritual perspective, and I might, but let's just take that for what it is, that they're losing at it. Or sometimes people win and they're like, winning doesn't feel how I thought it would feel. And I've mentioned this in other talks. I think even last week's talk, I mentioned it. So what are we really looking at here? Well, perspective is, in my experience, really, really important. What do we deduce or think about events or things that happen in our lives? This is very important, not just from a spiritual perspective, but also a perspective of manifestation, at least when it comes to law of assumption. So again, we can think of these as two separate things. I'm seeing it less and less that way. I know that there are people in the manifestation community who are, for lack of a better way of putting it, they're not very spiritually oriented. They're just sort of oriented toward, getting what they want. So I can see how someone on a serious spiritual path might question whether manifestation has a place in it. But the fact that someone like Eckhart Tolle, who I think I would find it hard to find somebody who doesn't see him as a legitimate spiritual teacher, and yet he talks about manifestation. So again, I feel like this is something that is part of spirituality. Not every tradition talks about manifestation, but some traditions do. As far as I know, Buddhism does not talk about it at all. But actually in the yoga tradition, in the form of sankalpa, we find this same idea showing up in the practice of yoga nidra, where one goes into a relaxed state and plants the seeds of what they'd like to manifest into the unconscious, for the unconscious to then manifest in life. So, not such a foreign concept, even in yoga. So, perspective is very, very powerful in my experience. What do I see? How do I interpret what I'm seeing? Who do I think that I am? And how does that result in me interpreting what's going on? So a very common thing for us to experience in this life is what we might call the victim perspective or victim mentality, which is other people are not treating me the way that I want to be treated, or the world is not set up the way that I want it to be set up. And I'd say our current culture might actually be set up in a way that it really encourages most people to, in some way or another, see themselves as a victim, as powerless to these bigger structures. So that could be the structure of your society. You could say that it's sexist or racist or whatever you want to see. And I'm not saying that you can't find evidence for this. And so I'm not saying that in a sense it's not true. The question more is, are we going to let that influence how we see ourselves and how we think others treat us? So if we say, oh, the world is sexist or racist or whatever it is, therefore that means I can't get what I want, or I can't be happy, or I have to suffer. This is what a lot of us do. The government is another one, right? In this country, the United States, the government tends to flip back and forth between diametrically opposed worldviews at the moment. And depending on who's in power, one group feels like they're the victim of the other group. So from a spiritual perspective, I would really invite you to let go of the victim perspective. And again, the manifestation point of view is that will actually affect the outcomes that you see in the world. If we take racism, for instance, there have been people who have made amazing lives for themselves and accomplished amazing things in the face of racism. Same with sexism. So there's always an exception to the rule. Even if we look out in the world and we say, oh, the world is stacked this way, we find someone who's the exception. So why not decide for yourself that you are the exception? This isn't to say that you don't necessarily try and change the world, But I personally find, maybe your experience will be different, but I personally find that changing social structures is a very daunting, difficult, overwhelming thing to do. Someone like Gandhi devoted his life to it, or Martin Luther King. If that's what you feel called to do, then beautiful, by all means, do it. But you'll notice that both of these men, they did it with a lot of grace in their heart, a lot of love. They didn't seem to turn the people or the society that was oppressing them into the enemy. They didn't see themselves as a victim. I would really, really say that about these two people. They don't have that victim put upon air or mentality about them. They saw themselves empowered. So they saw something unjust, and then they thought, I can change that. That is not a victim mentality. Okay, so if that's your calling, great. But I would say for many people, it's not. It's more than they want to bite off, more than they can chew. So for many people, sort of seeing the way things are arranged, maybe acknowledging it's not how we'd like it to be, but then allowing yourself to be the exception to the rule. It doesn't matter that other people are experiencing whatever it might be. You decide that that's not your experience. And this can empower us, which is so important from my perspective. Again, it's not about absolute truth. We can find that when we take on a perspective like I'm a victim, woe is me, they shouldn't have done that. We're really limiting the amount of information and perspective that we're taking on. One of the things I love about the work of Byron Katie is it will encourage people to then take their ideas like I'm a victim and turn that around. So how might you do that? Well, it might be I'm not a victim. It might be that the person I'm seeing myself as a victim of is actually a victim. And you find examples where these things are true. Again, the work, as far as I know, it's free, it's online. You can do it with somebody, but you can also just do it on your own. And Byron Katie has a lot of videos online of her doing the work with others, and you can see how powerful this is. So what is the work doing? It's changing our perspective. I believe this is also true of the meditation that I teach and that I lead. So Zen and Yoga Nidra. This is also true of the asana practice that I teach, the yoga postures that I teach, the inquiry that I lead people through. Everything I do is really about changing perspective, because if we change our perspective, it changes everything. And again, from my experience, this is true of not just in spirituality, but also in our everyday life. The real question comes down to, am I willing to change my perspective? Am I willing to see that maybe the way that I'm seeing it is not true? I have worked with both kinds of people. So I have worked with people that are more than ready to let go of their suffering and see things a different way. Maybe see that their way they saw things, it's not necessarily that it's wrong, but it's just that it's one perspective. It's not the absolute truth. And then I've worked with people who that is what they maintain. They're like, nope, the way I see it is the way that it is. You're not going to convince me otherwise. And they go on suffering as a result. So one of the things that I try and do as a teacher is to get these people to soften up, to relax, to maybe see that things are not the way that they perceive them to be. So I wanted to share this with you today because this is one of, if not the most powerful thing that I can share with you and teach you. Now, how you change perspective, this is a little trickier. So again, I have many tools at my disposal: yoga postures, yogic breathing, yogic energetic techniques, meditation, both guided and done in solitude, even things like prayer. These are all things, inquiry, these are all things that can help us change our perspective, help us free the mind of its grasp on a certain truth or certain idea. And this really goes back to our true nature. Our true nature isn't stuck to one perspective or one point of view. It can take any point of view, it can take any perspective. And again, we'll find that the truth is not in one limited perspective. The truth transcends limited perspective. So again, when someone says, no, that's true. Again, there can be such a thing as facts. I'm not really questioning facts, but what we find is our suffering isn't usually in facts. It's in our interpretation of events or facts. So-and-so died, that is a fact. But so-and-so died and I will never find true love again, that is not a fact. That is an interpretation of events. So that's just a quick example of what I'm talking about. And this again is where we have so much power. I got fired. So I got fired. I, again, can see myself as a victim. It wasn't fair. They shouldn't have done it. I didn't deserve this. And those things could be true, but we might not be seeing the whole picture. If we step back, we might find that there are certain actions that we took, things that we said that led to that happening that could have been avoided, that we played our part, right? But the tendency is to give all our power away with victimhood. Say, no, I'm just an innocent bystander. So that they're doing this to me and I'm powerless. But when we investigate, we often find that, no, actually, we played our part in it. I'm not saying we're guilty. I'm not saying they're guilty. That's not really what interests me. Again, what interests me is suffering. So we can maybe see how we played a part in what happened, and then we can see how things can actually be a benefit, that it's actually good that this happened, that this is an opportunity for us to grow and to move on. Again, we can take the perspective that they will regret firing me, right? This is something that we can just believe. But a lot of us, again, when we're in that victim mindset, we won't believe that. We'll be thinking, oh, what am I going to do? This is terrible. And again, these are all things that we don't have to believe. Our brain is trying to help us, but what we find is for modern people, this ancient brain that is really adapted to the African savanna, being a hunter-gatherer in the African savanna, it really can create as many problems as it solves. Maybe it even creates more problems than it solves. So we have to be willing to question the thoughts that it creates, the perspective that it feeds to us. We don't have to take delivery of that perspective. We can say, I see how you might believe that or how you might think that that's true, but I'm going to look for other ways of seeing this. And maybe I'm going to choose to believe one of those other ways. And from what I'm understanding about manifestation, that is really where your power lies in manifesting. If you are someone who believes something, again, if you assume something about yourself, so if you assume that you did not deserve to be fired, that you are a good employee, then what else might you assume? Someone else is going to snap me right up, and the place that fired me, they're going to regret it. Those are assumptions. Now again, you just have to choose to be the person to assume those things. Now, my experience with law of assumption and manifestation is it's very much like spirituality. It is something that takes time. Spirituality, for most people, it's not overnight. It's not a quick fix. I know we love these stories where somebody meets a teacher and they hit them on the head and they have a pow moment and then they're enlightened or whatever it is. These are wonderful stories, and I know it's very tempting to say this is what spiritual awakening looks like. In my experience, it's very, very rare. For most people, that's not what it looks like. It's not what their experience is. You're kind of looking at perhaps the superstars of spirituality and saying, this is the experience I need to have. So I need to be Taylor Swift. I need to be Drake. I need to be at the very top of the top spiritually. Well, I hate to break it to you, myself and most people are not going to be like that. It doesn't mean you're not a spiritual being. It doesn't mean that you can't grow and learn spiritually. And you may even have some moments that are like that. I know I've had a few of my own, those kind of wow moments. But even if you don't, it doesn't mean that you aren't on the path, that you can't grow, that you can't learn. I find more and more people have very sort of mundane awakenings and experiences without the fireworks. I think this is a sign of where we are now on this planet, that perhaps in the past it took that kind of overwhelming experience for somebody to wake up. But now, for whatever reason, it can be much more gentle and subtle, and it can gradually integrate into your life. All right, everyone, as usual, the intention here is for this talk to be helpful for you, and I hope it was. If you have any questions, please do reach out. I'm happy to chat with you. And again, you can help by liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, joining the Patreon community, or shopping at the shop. The links are below. And until next time, namaste. Have a beautiful day.